Welcome, everybody. My name's Gary Fortney, and this is The Trend. So this is the episode on Louis Gumpenberger. This is the second episode of the podcast regarding Pam Hupp, and we're going to talk about the death of Louis Gumpenberger. We're going to talk about the circumstances surrounding it with an individual named Pam Hupp. Those of you who know Pam Hupp, she was well known in the media and also the circles of law enforcement regarding her activities in association with somebody named Betsy Faria. Betsy was found dead in her house from multiple stab wounds. And again, as in our previous podcast, Betsy Faria's husband, Russ Faria, was charged with murder and went to trial, and he was convicted. An appeal took place regarding the circumstances of the criminal trial, and he was found not guilty in a retry. And as a result, Pam Hupp has been charged in the murder of Betsy Faria. And that trial, as of this date, is still pending, but it is warrants are issued and is pending trial. This episode is going to cover the death of Louis Gumpenberger that was handled by the O'Fallon, Missouri Police Department. I'd like to introduce our first guest, Lieutenant Brian Hilke, retired from the O'Fallon Police Department. Brian was one of the supervisory personnel during the entire investigation. Brian's going to give us some insight about the case. This case has been adjudicated, which means it has gone to court and it has been finalized. So we have a little bit more liberty to talk about the case since it already went to court. And then we're also going to talk to Aly Vogt. Aly Vogt is one of the producers of The Trend, and Aly's done some in-depth research about the death of Louis Gumpenberger, and her input and asking questions and her input about the case here is going to help a lot. So the story and saga of Pam Hupp continues regarding Louis's death. And Brian's going to cover a little bit from the time and date that this happened after the death of Betsy Faria and about the investigation that happened in O'Fallon, Missouri. Brian?
Sure. Thanks for having me on again, Gary. Appreciate that. Yeah, so, my limited involvement with Pam began earlier on, like we discussed in the last episode, when one of my detectives was signed on the major case squad on the Betsy Faria homicide in Lincoln County. We actually had some prior contacts with Pam throughout the years leading up to Louis Gumpenberger's murder. We actually had investigated a case where she was a victim of a stalking harassment case. We actually were able to charge somebody with that. It was a person out of, I believe, Iowa, that was sending her threatening, harassing letters and emails. We also had some other involvements with some property damage that happened around her neighborhood, where I think some of the neighbors' suspicion that she might have had some involvement in, we were never able to prove who had been doing the damage. So we had a lot of different kind of periphery involvement with Pam Hupp leading up to this incident that occurred in August of 2016.
Excellent. Subsequent investigations have taken place on this case, specifically related to Pam Hupp's mother named Shirley Newman. She was found dead in a senior citizen complex in St. Louis County, Missouri. And that'll be discussed in a subsequent episode regarding the death of Shirley Newman. And we will have a special guest who is Lieutenant Eric Van Allman, who is the commander of the St. Louis County Homicide Unit, who was the unit in charge of that investigation, which is still taking place. Aly, you know a little bit about this case, and so we're hoping you can ask questions or your curiosities, and also provide some input about the case here. So maybe we start off with the date and time it happened, with Brian covering that, and then we can move a little bit forward from there.
Sure. So it was a hot August day in 2016. I was at the station. I was actually preparing lunch in our little area with our microwave, and I had heard a call come out for a home invasion, which in O'Fallon, that generally does not happen very often, thankfully. So it kind of piqued my attention, obviously listening to the radio to see what was going to happen. And as the radio traffic continued on, dispatch frequently was updating us on the status that she had ran in her house, that this person was trying to kidnap her, and ultimately she disclosed on 911 that she had shot and killed this alleged intruder, and that's where we became involved.
And as a result, you responded to the scene with your detectives, investigators?
Yeah, so obviously a patrol responded first. They secured the scene. They contacted Pam Hupp and got a preliminary statement from her. My detectives responded. Charles County crime scene unit responded. There was a lot of people there, as you can imagine.
And let me just kind of clarify, which Brian will supplement this regarding the investigations. St. Louis County Homicide Unit, which I was part of for almost 15 years, half of my career, investigates the homicides and deaths themselves from their own homicide unit. Several departments that have the capabilities, manpower, and expertise investigate their own homicides or death cases. And then we have what's called the Major Case Squad. The Greater St. Louis Major Case Squad investigates homicide. They have to be a homicide for them to come out. And they have a rush of investigators come in. It's a short-term process where they will leave after so much time to gather as much investigative information as they can. And if its case is not solved, they turn it over to the host agency who had contacted them. O'Fallon Police Department, Brian, if I'm not mistaken, is capable and have handled their own homicide investigations.
Yes, I was the detective sergeant from October of 2008 until I got promoted in 2019. And all our homicides, officer-involved shootings, any kind of suspicious deaths, we investigated on our own.
Yeah. And a lot of people worry about investigating these cases on your own is going to be a conflict of interest. I have never found that. I've investigated officer-involved shootings where officers were involved in using deadly force, where officers have been killed in the line of duty. I've investigated those. I've also investigated numerous cases involving people who are well known in St. Louis County. I've never worried and never been part of any conflict of interest because we want to get to the truth. And the truth is all that matters in these cases. So no conflict of interest. We investigate our own. Some smaller agencies in outstate Missouri call in the Highway Patrol in some cases to do the investigations, which happens, and other individuals. So it's not a reflection on the capabilities. It's more a reflection on the manpower available to do these investigations. So, Aly, I think you want to start off as ask Brian some questions here. We'll kick this off.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about Pam's story? What did she tell you when you first arrived on the scene? What information did you get?
Sure. So actually, the first officer on scene was a captain. He was coming back from his house from lunch back to the station when the call came out. So he was actually the first one that was on scene. Thankfully for us, he was a prior detective. He was a sergeant, a detective sergeant, and a detective lieutenant. So he had a lot of experience with working these types of cases. So when he showed up on scene, he obviously checked the alleged suspect. He was obviously deceased. He took Pam kind of away from the scene and got the initial statement. And what she told our captain, who ended up being a police chief, by the way, and since retired, was that she had been driving around all day looking for like resale shops, like antique shops. She said she'd been driving around and eventually decided to come back home to let her dog out. And in the process of letting her dog out, she said as she was walking back to her vehicle, she saw a silver car occupied by two people speed very quickly out of the cul-de-sac, which kind of teed into her house. And this gentleman who tried to kidnap her jumps out of the car, runs up, jumps in her car, is armed with a knife, and says, "Take me to bank to get Russ's money." Now, she proceeds to tell our captain that she doesn't know anybody named Russ. That was kind of the first really indication of, what do you mean you don't know a Russ? She had been dealing with Russ Faria since the end of 2011. And for her to say that she had no idea who Russ was kind of, we were taken aback by that.
Isn't it interesting? So many people have wanted to talk to Pam Hupp now that she's refused to talk since she's been subsequently charged with a murder case. But you're one of the few people, you and your detectives, that have actually had a chance to talk to her and interact with her.
Yeah, so she voluntarily came back to the station to give us a statement about what happened. Two of my detectives, one who has since left law enforcement and another who's now a captain at O'Fallon, had the opportunity to interview her at the station. One of the things I always, when I talk about this case, is there's a lot of things, if you just looked at the one thing, it's really not that big of a deal. It just seems odd. But as you started investigating and looking at all these different things, they kept piling up one upon the other, and it just eventually became so overwhelming it was hard to overcome for her. And she was very calm, very cool, which again, in of itself, everybody reacts differently to stress. I think some of the things that I took note of was the fact that none of her clothes was disheveled. She looked like she had just walked, basically have gotten dressed and had been driving around. There was no tearing, there was no dishevelment, no dirt, no nothing. She was very calm and cool. In fact, when she talked about how she shot Louis Gumpenberger, it was very cold and calculating. She basically said, I just kept walking towards and I kept firing the gun until it wouldn't fire anymore, which for somebody who's not trained in firearms and active combat, that was very strange just in of itself.
Well, if I could just interrupt before you ask the next question, what's interesting, Brian and Aly, have there not been a lot of podcasts out there about the Pam Hupp case?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have there not been a lot of TV shows? One particular is a TV miniseries with Renee Zellweger, who portrayed Pam Hupp. All these podcasts, all these episodes out there, and all the vast information. How often can a broadcast like this actually talk to one of the people who have actually interviewed Pam Hupp in a law enforcement profession? And so, investigation. So, Brian and his detectives, I actually did the interview of Pam Hupp, and how many people would like the opportunity to interview Brian, which we're doing today, about get to know her. So, one last thing I just want to know is, I want you to describe her. Brian, again, in my career, I've interviewed dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of murder suspects and individuals involved in crimes. We all get to know them on a personality basis, and I'd just like to get an idea of how would you read her? I mean, you've interviewed other people. Tell us something that the public may not know, the deep down part of her. We'll get into the white neck band around her neck later on, okay? But let's talk about her that the public may not know, who would be curious.
The easiest way for me to describe her as very detached. Any kind of emotion is forced, it's fake. I'm not a psychologist, but as you have had a lot of experience with psychopaths, if I had to give an unofficial clinical diagnosis, I would say that she's a psychopath, because if you look at the characteristics of a psychopath, she really fits all those boxes.
Brian's being kind to himself. He's not a psychiatrist or psychologist. Brian is a law enforcement certified polygraph examiner, and Brian, in his years of polygraphs, has been trained in psychological responses and reading people. And Brian, you are a professional in that. Just like I became a professional in interviewing criminal suspects, you have become, I would say, an expert in reading people from that perspective of polygraph, right?
Well, I appreciate that. I'll slide you a 20 later.
I'll take it. Anything I can do here? So.
You did buy me lunch earlier, so I appreciate
Cool.
that. Yeah, I mean, she is definitely one of the few individuals that I would say over 29 years, because I still do polygraphs, I still do interviews. You and I do consulting where we interview murder suspects and those involved in violent crimes. She is one of very few that I felt uncomfortable being around. I've described her eyes as soulless in the past, almost like a predator, like a shark. And until you really run into people like that, it's very unsettling at times.
Okay, Aly, go ahead and pick up where you...
All right, yeah. We've talked a little bit about Pam, but I think it's important that we talk a little bit about Louis himself.
Right.
He had some pretty extensive disabilities. Is that right?
Yeah, so Louis, he was involved in a vehicle crash where he was physically and mentally disabled due to the accident. The best way to describe it was he kind of had the mentality of like a 12 or 13-year-old. Very gullible. That's how his mom described him after the accident. He had a lot of physical limitations. In fact, once we found those out, the way she described how Louis allegedly jumped out of the car, ran, fought over the knife, tried to push his way in through the door, all these physical acts that she described, it was physically impossible for him to perform past once the accident happened. So again, those were other things that it just kept adding up against Pam as we went through the investigation. Louis, even though he had all these disabilities, he was a very good father. We talked to his mom. He lived with his mom. He had a younger son at the time, and I know he was a very good dad. He took very good care of his son. And that's really, I think, what gets lost in, especially when we talk about like the miniseries or with
Renee
Zellweger, is, it's very campy for those that haven't seen it. It's almost like a comedy, like a dark.
Yeah, it's a hybrid comedy versus, versus.
And I know a lot of people that were involved in the case didn't like that just because of that fact that I think it really downplayed the seriousness of what she did. I mean, she literally took advantage of this person who had a physical and mental disability from a vehicle crash and tried to frame him and use him for her own purpose.
I first met Aly. She was one of my college students where I'm a professor, and that's how she became an intern through Vista Law Enforcement Training Consulting, eventually a producer for the Trend Media. And Aly was bringing up the victimology part. Most people know the suspects, all right? Most people know suspects' names, a suspect. But, how about the victims? And when Aly said, what about the victim? Who are the victims? What is the victim? And the victimology is so important. Again, does the victim have the capability to do of what people said that they did? In a way, it sounds like he didn't. So
yeah, and that's really was the turning point for us. One point I'll make before I go into that is, again, we do lose the site that there are people that are still affected by this. You know, his son, his mother, who have to live with this every day, what Pam did to their father and son. And you know, with any good investigation, you have to start with knowing the background of your people, whether it's your suspect, whether it's your victim. And, you know, that's really where it was a turning point for us, is when we were able to locate his mom and get all the information about what was his physical capabilities, what was his mental capabilities. But he couldn't drive. All these things that added up that made no sense of how he could even first mastermind this complex scheme of extortion, kidnapping, murder, and, you know, it just didn't make any sense. And that was really after the beginning of day 2 is when we started finding, and the tide started turning really against Pam.
But Aly started.
All right, I think we can start to talk about a little bit of the evidence. So there were some things found inside of Louis Gumpenberger's pants, is that right?
Yeah, and that was one of the weird things that we actually found was, you know, as we were processing the crime scene, and crime scene is going through, and the medical examiners there on scene because they have control of the body. One of the things that we located was this Ziploc bag, and within this Ziploc bag that was in his shorts pocket was a note, some money, and a pen. And when we looked at the note had some various odd writing. I have terrible handwriting. But even looking at this, it almost looked faked or disguised. The way that the note read was very odd. The dollar amount, it was almost like a murder for plot plan. That was very, very strange.
That's pretty interesting. What about the knife? Was there anything interesting about the knife?
Yes. So as I described earlier, one of the things that Pam said was when he got in her vehicle, he was armed with a knife. And she said during this encounter, she miraculously somehow karate chopped this knife out of his hand. It went flying through the air and then perfectly landed, blade down, handle up, in between the center console and her leather seats. And one of the things, 2 things that are interesting about that is, one, she had just bought, her car was relatively new. 2, when we went inside, the way she stored her knives in her kitchen was the same way. She had the knives in her kitchen between the oven and the countertop with the blade down, handles up. So, and again, I have to give credit to all my investigators, crime scene investigations, my cyber team, cyber investigator Larry McLean, the prosecutors, because, you know, without them, this would not have been solved. And one of the things that concerning the knife, you know, I always try to give shout outs to the people that did very great work on this case. And one is Rusty McDermott. He's actually now a detective sergeant for O'Fallon. And he actually took it upon himself to do research on that knife. And what he found out was that knife was not sold in a lot of areas. It was actually exclusive to Dollar Tree. And with that information, we were able to locate the exact date and time when she bought that knife.
Wow. That's great investigation. So, if you don't mind, interrupt real quick. How did Pam Hupp become involved with Louis Gumpenberger? I mean, where did they first meet? That's
sure. So,
interesting to me.
And that's why we thought it was odd that she was telling us, you know, in that first interview that she had been driving around. And what we later determined was, we knew that she knew that we were going to get cell tower data, right? Because that came up in the first case with Betsy Faria. She knew that we were going to get her cell phone. We were going to try to show her location through cell towers. What she didn't know is that at that time, which was relatively new, is if you have Google on your phone, which almost everybody does, everybody has Google Maps or Google Email, you are getting tracked. And almost every phone, unless you go through it every day and change the setting, your phone is reaching out and trying to grab Wi-Fi. Like we're sitting here now. We have Wi-Fi here, correct?
Yep.
Well, every few seconds, our phones are reaching out and trying to grab that Wi-Fi. Even if it doesn't connect, that stuff is getting tracked. So what we were able to find through Google Waypoints, which is what it's called. Again, I got to give a shout out to Larry McLean, who's since retired as well and still works in cyber investigations, was that we were able to locate him specifically to the apartment complex within meters of where Louis was at that day.
Amazing. And again, knowing the victim, knowing how they became involved with each other is important, because that ties into the case as we progress a little bit more. Aly, let me ask you a question. When was the first time you ever heard the name Pam Hupp?
Honestly, the first time I ever heard the name Pam Hupp was when I watched the series. I didn't know that Brian was involved, somebody I knew was involved. I didn't know until I saw the actor playing him, and I heard his name, and I thought that was the coolest thing, and I was really excited.
That's kind of neat because, again, Aly's a college student. She's getting her master's degree at a relatively young age. Congratulations to her, and also with our executive producer, Sarah Streifler, on their academic achievement. You'll meet Sarah in subsequent episodes. Yeah, hearing the name for the first time, and you were working for Vista at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was an intern for Vista Law Enforcement Training, which she got college credits for, and she's has graduated from the intern program. Now she was working for a media company.
And Vista.
And Vista, yeah, she still works for Vista. She's an intern coordinator. What piqued your interest the most about the case? I know knowing Brian being part of it. Was there any mystery or aspect of the case that really interested you to want to know more?
Really, it was just how each part of the case connected to one another. This is a really complex series of events.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really interesting how all of the evidence in the end led back to her and everything connected.
What's interesting, too, is we're going to talk on our episode about Shirley Newman. And, Shirley Newman is Pam Hupp's mother, right?
Yeah.
We know she died. And so Aly got a little bit more interest in that case since Brian and I are familiar with that case a little bit. And we've also going to have a lieutenant who runs the homicide unit from the county police in here doing that, too. So, Brian, where did the investigation take you? I say us because I guess I'm still feel like I'm in law enforcement. Where did it take you guys? And when did you really start focusing? And I want to hear about the donut shop, too. That always interests me about the donut shop video, but and kind of progress a little bit from there.
Sure. So like I said, once we were able to locate Louis's mother, that's really when things started turning. And what really sealed the deal for us was about the same time that my detectives were talking to Louis's mom, we got a call from St. Charles County Police Department. And one of the detectives, who's since retired, had called us and said, "Hey, I have some information that is pertinent to your case." And I remember sitting in my lieutenant's office, and him and I were kind of discussing what our thoughts were. And I remember my lieutenant, I'm like, I believe that she somehow picked him up and set him up. That was my belief.
Set him up for what?
That I didn't know. I knew that after we got the information from Mom that he was physically incapable of doing this, I knew just somehow that she had set him up. And about 5 minutes after that conversation, St. Charles County detectives come in and they inform us about an incident that happened a week prior to ours. And that's where Carol Alford comes into play. And Carol, for those that are familiar, she was an amazing witness. I wish all our witnesses were as good as Carol, because she's a spitfire. She doesn't take any nonsense. She's a straight shooter. Amazing. And what we found out was that a week earlier, Pam had tried to lure her into her car for a quote-unquote 911 reenactment, which was...
Wasn't something with Dateline involved with that?
Yes. So Pam told her that she was a Dateline producer. And what is interesting is that Pam knew this Dateline producer, who I've gotten to know pretty well from doing several of these episodes on Dateline. She used her character, used her as a lure to bring Carol Alford into this. And Carol was so smart that she ended up getting Pam's not only vehicle and license plate on her security camera at her house, but also got her sticking her head out the window. So once we were able to talk to Carol and see the video, it was a no-brainer. At that point, it was, okay, well, let's hit the gas and let's try to lock this down, cross our T's, dot our I's to prove that Pam did this.
Carol went on to be involved with Russ Faria.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, I believe they're married or engaged.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's really interesting.
Yes, and that's the thing. If you didn't know anything about this story and you just read about it, nobody would believe it.
No.
I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. We kept saying that, as we keep calling it here, a saga, as the saga continues, you couldn't make it up. It's so out of any kind of reality that I'm used to.
Brian, as you and I both know, and as our producers know, and everybody who's been working with Vista, because I know Aly and Sarah have attended some of our homicide investigation classes and death investigations. You just don't go pick up any suspect, right? So what's going on in the meantime when you were focusing on Pam Hupp, right?
Yeah, so like I said, once we talked to Carol, we had Carol pick her out of a photo lineup. We seized the evidence. A lot of the time, so from the initial time we received the call to the time we were able to put handcuffs on her was actually 7 days.
So you're building a case in the background, right?
Yes. And once we were able to obtain the Google waypoints from her phone data, we spent probably 2, maybe 3 days of actually going out and getting video surveillance, because at the time, nobody knew anything about Google waypoints. Obviously now investigations, everybody knows everything about your cell phone tracks you. Everybody knows about Wi-Fi and data points. At the time, what we found out later, we were actually the second agency in the United States to actually use Google waypoints in a criminal investigation in a murder case. So one of the things that Larry McLean wanted was, hey, can you validate this Google waypoint, the cell phone data? So what we did is we sent out all our teams to scour for any kind of video surveillance we could find. And what we were able to determine was that anytime we could locate a camera, when that Google waypoint, when it said her phone was right there, we were able to verify through video surveillance her vehicle. She was there at that time.
Larry McLean, retired detective or officer. I trained him as a recruit in the police academy. I was a police academy instructor. Larry went through when I was teaching at the St. Louis County Police Academy, and Larry moved up. But again, the technical aspect are the behind-the-scenes people. They do stuff behind the scenes that a lot of the public doesn't know. Why, we might be out there, we're like out there. A lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes is important. Aly, what next do you think would be important to know about this case? Actually, for the listening public about some parts of this.
Just really quick, I have a question about the Google waypoints. Sure. How accurate is that? How close can you get to knowing exactly where?
Right. And that's why we spent so much time on the video surveillance. So at the time, once we got the Google waypoint back, we believed that it was relatively close. So when you look at technical data on like cell towers, usually it's within like 1,000-yard radius.
Exactly.
So it could be either 1,000 miles that way, 1,000. It's not very accurate, which is why when Pam gave us that original statement, she told us that she drove in the area where Louis was because she would know that we would get cell tower data that would show that she was in the area. What she didn't realize is that when you talk about Wi-Fi connectivity, we're talking not thousands of meters, we're talking literal yards, like single-digit yards. What we tried to do is try to get Google on the phone and have a technician verify, hey, how close can we say with accuracy that these Google waypoints are? Well, at the time, Google wouldn't allow any technician to give us an answer on that. And that's when we turned, hey, how do we verify this information? And that's where we turned to, okay, well, we know she drove all in these areas. We know we had these Google waypoints, almost like a breadcrumb track. And every time that we found a place that had video surveillance, when her phone said she was there, we were able to find her right there.
This ties into the donut shop. Aly, we talked about the donut shop previously. You're a little bit familiar about this, but I'm going to have Brian explain. The donut shop is a donut shop that I actually enjoy going to. It's now closed. And when I saw the video, I actually saw the video of the donut shop, and this is how precise it was. So, Brian, why don't you explain about the donut shop video? A video at a donut shop that's pointing towards the street.
Yeah, so for those that aren't familiar, where Pam lived, she lived off Bryan Road, which runs north and south between, her house was basically between Mexico Road, which is south, and then Highway 70, which is north. And one of the things that we realized is, based on the Google waypoints, we knew that she was driving past on Bryan Road, past this donut shop. So we went, they had video, and just like all these other videos, it showed that when her phone said she was at this location, we were able to find video surveillance that showed her there. What I believe, and pretty much anybody that I've shown this video to, including the prosecutor at the time, Tim Lomar, if you look at the video, I believe that you can see Louis in the passenger seat of her vehicle. He was wearing a Mizzou baseball cap. And if you look at that video, I believe you can see the Mizzou baseball cap with him sitting in the passenger seat. And to me, it's really the last image that you see of Louis live.
The part of Louis being at Pam Hupp's house, that's where the case started, and that's where I think it began to fall apart regarding her. Kind of explain what went on, maybe some behind-the-scenes stuff the public isn't aware about the interaction they had. The part in the bedroom is very interesting to me about the interaction. So what happened at the house? What did she say happened? And then what did you find out from your investigation?
Sure. So, one of the things that, I know you and I teach in our interview and interrogation and our investigation courses, whether it's homicide or whatever, is we always want to get a timeline. We always want to lock them into their statement, because that is either going to prove or disprove what they're saying. So we spent several hours going through her timeline. Where did she go? What did she do? And some of the statements that she made, as far as, when, we talked earlier about Louis running up and jumping in the car. We knew that wasn't possible. She said that when she miraculously karate chopped this knife out of Louis's hand that perfectly fell right in between her brand new dashboard and nice leather seats, is she runs through the garage and through kind of like a mud room and then into her bedroom. And she tells us how she is on 911 on her cell phone. She's holding the door closed while Louis is supposedly trying to push his way in to get to her. She's somehow able to keep the door closed with her hand and get 15 feet from the door to her dresser drawer where she gets a gun. It just didn't make any sense. That's when we started, especially crime scene. Again, I can't tout how well crime scene. I had a great working relationship with St. Charles County Crime Scene Unit. They're amazing at what they do. What they found also supported that too. One of the things we found when we talked about the Ziploc bag was 9 $100 bills in that Ziploc bag. Well, part of their thoroughness, crime scene, was they found other $100 bills in her house. And being very thorough, they photographed not only just these bills, but also enough where they could document the serial numbers. Well, on their own, we didn't ask them. They actually went and looked at the serial numbers and were actually able to say, hey, this is odd. The 9 $100 bills in Louis's pocket are sequential to the $100 bills that she had in her nightstand. So it's things like that it's these people are so amazing at what they do. They don't need direction. They did it on their own. And all those pieces played such a critical role in the great resolution of this case.
One thing, like I mentioned, the tech people behind the scenes. If anybody thinks that I, Brian, or any homicide detective can go do this by yourself, you're sadly mistaken. It takes a collective group of individuals from a whole bunch of areas. The three main components that work to solve a murder case or death case is law enforcement for the initial response, the medical investigator, right, medical examiner or coroner that come to the scene. They do their medical investigation of the victim and transport for autopsy by a forensic pathologist. The last component is the prosecutor. Without the prosecutors reviewing, documenting, and constructing a prosecutable case, we'd be lost. So don't ever think when we say I, it's never I, it's we. And I can't tell you how much I've relied on other investigators, other detectives, which you hear in our next episode with Lieutenant Van Almen, is working together. So where did Pam first pick up Louis Gumpenberger? Where did she meet him that day?
Once we were able to determine, based on the Louis's mother's statement, based on the knowledge of what he did, based off her cell phone and the Google Waypoint data, Louis liked to hang out right outside his apartment. So he lived in an apartment complex right off the service road in St. Charles, and he would spend most of his time when he wasn't taking care of his son. He would go outside, and he had a specific chair right outside his apartment where he would smoke. That was his thing. And what we believe, based on the Google Waypoint and all the other evidence that we were able to recover, is that the same scheme that she used with Carol Alfred, because Carol Alfred was also offered money to do this bogus 911 call. I believe that Pam saw him, thought it was going to be an easy target, said, hey, how would you like to make some extra money? And I think Louis was like, sure. I think she rushed him, said, hey, we got to do it now. He got in her car, and she drove him to his death.
And that's something. The vulnerabilities that people take advantage of for people is heartbreaking, and that's one of the heartbreaking aspects of the case. So at the house, Louis Gumpenberger is there at Pam Hupp's house, and obviously things were planned, were they not later found out by Pam? But what was her plan? What was her motivation or plan and motive for this?
Again, this is really speculation because Pam never told us her side of the story. I'm sure you're going to ask about that later. But, speculation on our part is that at the time, Russ Faria had just got his conviction overturned. He had just been found not guilty in the retrial. And it was our belief that he was going to go after and try to recruit the money, that insurance money that she got from Betsy. And I think that the focus was kind of shifting towards Pam. And I think in an effort to shift the attention away from her, she wanted to shift the focus back to Russ.
Regarding the death of Betsy?
Yes, but specifically this attempted kidnapping, extortion, murder, because when she described the vehicle and the two people that were in this vehicle that Louis jumped out of, it was interesting to note that during her description, she described the driver as somebody who looked very similar to Russ Faria. Within the note, said to drop the money off at a place on Sunglow, which is a street residence in Lake St. Louis. That's where Russ was staying with his mother at the time. So it was a clear, obvious attempt to frame Russ Faria being involved in this attempted kidnapping, extortion, murder plot.
Something with a script. I'm familiar with this, but the public may not be as familiar about what happened regarding, I believe, Pam Hupp was baiting him or trying to show her what we call his culpability. Culpability means trying to show guilt. She's trying to show guilt on on Gumpenberger for the crimes. What about that? And what was she having him do?
Yeah, so when we talk more about the Google Waypoint, you can see where she stayed in front of Louis's apartment for several minutes. And we believe that's when the discussion went on about making money to do this bogus 911 call. You see her once we believe he got in the vehicle, she speeds directly, gets on the highway, drives directly to Bryan Road, passes the donut shop that we talked about. And then within the distance between the donut shop and her house, there's about a 5 or 7 minute period where she actually stops. And I believe at that time, that is when she was trying to coach him, say, okay, here's how we're going to do the 911 call. This is what I want you to say. This is what we're going to do. And if you listen to the 911 call, you can hear him say things that really don't make sense. And I think part of the combination of her trying to get him to, quote unquote, read a script for a 911 call and his mental and physical disabilities, it doesn't make any sense. And you can almost hear her get upset with
frustrated,
with him at one point, because you can hear her go, no, 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 no. So my belief is that he was either not in his mark, he wasn't in his place, because one of the other things that we found was a swatch of carpet that had been basically like, when they come in and lay your carpet, there's usually extra pieces of carpet that's left over. There was this extra piece of carpet that was perfectly placed right under him where he was bleeding out, almost like to the point where she didn't want any blood or anything to get on her actual carpet. So she had him placed specifically on this piece of carpet, so if he did bleed, it wouldn't ruin her carpet.
Yeah, amazing. The script interests me because, like you say, she was getting frustrated by it wasn't going exactly the way she wanted. She's trying to correct that. Aly, what do you think about the calculation of somebody that involved Pam Hupp trying to have this playing out there?
Well, I really think with people that, again, I'm not a psychiatrist or anything like Brian was saying, but I think with people like that, they're going to plan out every move. They're going to really have everything planned out to a T. And they're going to try to think of everything. And I think that's kind of where Pam's downfall was that she could not think of every circumstance, everything, every little detail. There were a couple of things that she missed. And I really think that that's what led to her eventual capture.
That's a great point, Aly, because if people try to do things too complex, that was a very complex scheme. Think about that, the complexity. If any little things gets messed up, it doesn't go exactly as planned. Some of our podcasts, we get everything set up. You might get a technical glitch here and there. We're all prepared for that. We fix it and move on. Something goes bad.
Words that get said in between.
Yeah, that's just part of it. So anyways, and she got frustrated because some of the part of the plan was falling apart. So let's say during the 911 call, as it's taking place here, what is the next thing that happened regarding the interaction between the two?
Between them two?
Yeah, so and the final gunshot.
Yeah, so if you listen to the 911 call, you can actually hear the gunshots. You can hear the gunshots. You can hear him fall to the floor. You can hear the smoke alarm go off. And really, I talked earlier about how she's very cold and unemotional. There's really one part in that 911 call where it actually sounds like legitimate emotion, and that is right after she shoots and kills him. And it lasts for about maybe 15, 30 seconds, and then it kind of gets back to more of that fake response.
What do you think happened? It's just the realization, or what do you think?
I think the excitement of the actual murder. I think she is one person, again, like a typical psychopath, have trouble expressing emotion, having emotion. They don't have it. They're missing that part in their brain that doesn't allow that. And I think this was probably one of the very few times in her life that she actually had an emotional experience.
So we have Louis being shot in the house. The police are on the way, if I'm not mistaken. And as this is going on, the response by uniformed officers plays such an important part of the initial response, securing the scene, maintaining control of the scene, doing what's called a protective sweep if there's any possible suspects here. That all takes place with the uniformed officers. Detectives arrive. They do initial investigation. Let me talk a little bit about the investigative part. Detectives just don't rush in and start investigating. And as in my college classes, which Aly can attest to, and Sarah, you actually want to have what are called overalls done. What does that mean? That means when you get to a scene, if I'm a detective, I'll go up to the crime scene investigators. Hey, have you done your overalls? That means, have you went inside and documented the scene with photographs, diagrams, or anything as pristine as possible before we even go into? I will not even go into a scene until all of the photographs have been taken of the entire inside, documenting the scene for protection. There's what's called Lockhart's theory of transfer. If you walk in, you're bringing something. If you walk out, you're taking something out, be it the most minute piece of evidence. And so that's why the crime scene people are so important processing that. Well, officers get to the scene. The uniformed officers have first contact with Pam Hupp. How did they convince her to go to the police station? And was she cooperative?
She was. I think she knew in her plan, as you mentioned, Aly, that she knew that she was going to have to go back. She was going to have to give a statement. I think that's why she talked about driving to different areas, because she knew we were going to get her cell phone and try, to her, she thought we were only going to get the cell tower data. She was very cooperative up until the very end when we asked for a DNA sample and for fingerprints.
Was that at the station?
That was at the station.
All right, let's go to the station now. Who transported her?
Believe one of our patrol officers transported her. Two of our detectives, I think I mentioned earlier, Matt Wolf, who was a detective sergeant at the time, captain now for O'Fallon, and then Kevin Mountain, who's since retired, did the interview with my Lieutenant Mike Rowich at the station. Yeah,
and the cases I worked, if I'm going to transport a witness, I'll have them ride with me a lot. And why? I want to see what they say. Now, there's legal requirements regarding ruling Miranda versus Arizona regarding custodial interrogation to make sure you maintain the rights. But if people start talking, those are called spontaneous utterances without being questioned, which is all legal in court. So I look at they're going to say something. And again, in this case here, it's not a bad idea to have uniformed officers because you have a chance to prepare a little bit and gather your thoughts. And if you're in a car with her, you can't plan that. So what about her arrival at the station? How did the interview take place? And
so
circumstances?
Again, at the time, we were treating her as a victim. She said that somebody tried to kidnap her, assault her, and she was the victim. So
did you believe her?
At the time, I was keeping
I like that invitation real quick.
Yeah. So, again, I always tell everyone who thinks about investigations or thinks about wanting to be a detective, my biggest piece of advice to them is follow the facts. We all have our opinions and our thoughts and beliefs and our biases, but ultimately, if you follow the facts, you're going to usually come to the correct decision. And one of the things that I always did anytime I got called to a scene was I immediately always listened to the 911 call. Mm-hmm. And listening to the 911 call, it didn't sound right. It just sounded fake. Did that mean that she murdered Louis and set this all up day one? No. So I kept an open mind. Follow the facts. We treated her as a victim. She went up voluntarily. She cooperated, like I said, up to the point where we asked for DNA and fingerprints. She let us look at her phone. She let us download her phone. She let us take her clothing. She gave us a statement. So at the time, she was very cooperative.
So, Aly, let me ask you a question. You're not going to know by experience. I want you to have a thought process. What if you had somebody who's a psychopath and you're the detective interviewing somebody like that? What do you think your thoughts would be, or how would you go about this? I mean, again, I want to ask you as a relatively new person to law enforcement getting involved in the field.
Well, I think in that situation, I mean, knowing that, I think I would shift my entire thought process away from just taking in information to also trying to evaluate the information as I'm taking it in. I mean, you have to find the truth in everything that they're giving you because they might not be giving you the truth.
And how about evaluating the person? You got their information, you look at them too. So that's one thing kind of getting at here is, who is this person? What are their personality traits? How are they talking to you? Emotion traits. And so these are things you'll develop in your career in law enforcement, talking to people. But Brian and I both interview people with pure evil, all right? We seem to look in their faces. You don't show fear, but you show apprehension for the fact of, maybe they could attack me. Maybe they're going to lie to me. Maybe they're going to be a better liar and seem truthful. So these are things that come into play. So yes, I'm a learning process for all you guys understanding this on the field of law enforcement. So you were interviewing Pam with which detective?
So the original first was Matt Wolf and Kevin Mountain.
Excellent. So who read rights?
Didn't read rights. She was...
Why not?
Because she was not under arrest and she was not asked any guilt-seeking questions.
Correct. It's called non-custodial. I think it's non-custody. She was in an interview room, but it was a non-guilt-seeking. You're gathering facts and circumstances about the case, okay? So exactly.
Yeah. In fact, if you look at the report, if you get a copy of the report from O'Fallon, you'll see that we originally listed her as a victim in the report and Louis as a suspect. It wasn't until probably day 3 we actually changed the classification to where Louis was the victim and Pam is the suspect.
So let's get into the interview a little bit, maybe behind the scenes. How'd the interview go? What compared to other interviews?
I think it went well. I mean, she gave us a lot of information that we were able to either prove or disprove. Again, very unemotional, but again, you can't read too much into that because everybody reacts to stressors and trauma differently. Just one part of it. Again, she gave us really good information. We did find it odd that she, up to the time we arrested her, because we asked multiple times if she would give us a DNA sample or fingerprints, and she refused to do that.
So let's say we know she didn't confess. But she did give you information, either non-disclosed information or information you gave that you could disprove. That's called verifying an alibi or verifying the facts, which you do. You keep them there. You try to verify the information while they're there. So interviews taking place. Anything of curious nature happened during the interview?
One thing that she, at the very beginning, she asked if we were recording it because she said that she always ended up on Channel 2's TV, and there's a particular investigative reporter that she does not like, and made mention of that. And of course, we told her, hey, we by policy, we have to record this. So that was one of the interesting things she said at the very beginning of the interview.
During the interview, which has been documented on video, she gave you facts and circumstances about the case that led you to believe that she may be involved or piqued your interest, I guess is a good way to say that.
Well, the great thing for us is she confessed on 911. I mean, she
shot him.
She shot him. There was no doubt. It was going to be the question of, was it a stand your ground castle doctrine, which in Missouri you have the right to defend yourself if somebody is trying to inflict serious physical injury or death on you in your home. And so the hard part was done. She confessed for us. For us, eventually it was the point of, can we prove that there was an intent there and that she set him up and that Louis was an unwitting victim?
All right, so let's go to the point of, sometimes nature calls, which means sometimes you need to use the restroom or asked to go out, which, of course, all people being interviewed are afforded the opportunity to use the restroom, get a drink of water, or even something to eat if it's a long interview. At some point, did she ask to use the restroom?
Yes. Like, I think it might have...
It's not funny, but it's a part of the case that has been talked about.
It is.
Because I wasn't there, by the way. Okay.
And I was. You learn from your mistakes. I learned from this mistake, hopefully. And it was a week to the day that she killed Louis. We ended up making the arrest. And once we transported her back to the station, just, Aly, you were kind of talking more about like what her psyche and stuff. And I described her as very cold and calculating. One of the things that really concerned me was on our way up to the interview room, we have to take an elevator at our old police station.
And this after you arrested her?
This is after we arrested her.
So it's a subsequent day after the initial.
Yes, it's a week later after the initial homicide. And as we're riding up the elevator, I had that weird kind of sixth sense feeling of somebody staring at my gun. And I remember turning around. I remember her looking directly at my gun. And that just kind of describes her predator type personality, that she was scheming even at that point in handcuffs, knowing that we had the goods on her, that how am I going to get out of this? So she was very, even I would say aloof is the best way to describe her during when we were good. So at this point, we did give her Miranda.
Yep.
She was under arrest. We were going to ask guilt-seeking questions.
Did she waive her rights?
She did not. She said that she wanted to talk to us, but she wanted a lawyer. So at that particular time, Matt Myers, who is an amazing investigator, he's still there at O'Fallon, still a detective. Him and I step out of the interview room, and we were trying to make attempts to locate her attorney. Well, during this point, again, in her scheming mind, she sees the Bic pen, which we call the Pam Hupp pen.
What happened to the pen?
Well, she smuggled it and secreted it.
Where's that now?
Oh, it's in evidence.
Is that going to be a keepsake? Maybe
that one's in evidence. I have a model one.
Okay, good.
Of it. Just like I have a knife too. Just like it. Actually, I talked about Rusty McDermott and his great investigation on knife. He actually bought us all same type of knives so we could keep as a keepsake. And I have a pen as a keepsake. And
so it's a Bic pen. You even know the name?
Yes, the Bic. It was a medium point black Bic pen. And she has to go to the restroom, which we obviously would accommodate. She subsequently went in the bathroom and stabbed herself multiple times in the neck and in both wrists, both sides of the neck. Very similar to what happened to Betsy Faria, which is very ironic that she's now been charged in that case. And the way she tried to either escape questioning or try to end her life was very similar to what happened to Betsy.
How did you know something was wrong in the bathroom?
So we had a female officer take her to the restroom while we were trying to attempt to locate her attorney, because there was a local attorney in O'Fallon. As she was in the restroom, the officer, after several minutes, asked her, said, "Hey, Pam, you doing okay?" And Pam's like, "Yeah, I'm fine." This whole time, as she's answering, like, there's no problems, there's no issues, she was in there stabbing herself repeatedly, not showing any kind of emotion, any kind of pain.
And these were deep wounds, weren't they?
Very deep wounds. After several minutes after that, when the female officer tried to contact her again, she didn't hear anything, so she opened the door and found Pam literally lying in a pool of blood.
Why do you think she did that?
I think she was trying to figure out a way to get out of her situation. I think she believed the only way that she was going to get out of this was either killing herself or buying her time by going to the hospital. Different people have different beliefs. Some people think that she actually tried to kill herself. I know Tim Lomar, the former prosecutor of St. Charles, he believes that she wasn't. I'm not sure. One note that the listening public who might be diehard Pam Hupp fanatics don't know is that when we pulled Pam out of the bathroom, Matt Myers, who I mentioned earlier is the detective that was with me, she looks up at Matt and says, "Don't let this young man get in trouble." I mean, just crazy. She's sitting there bleeding out and she looks up and says, I hope this young man doesn't get in trouble.
Have you ever encountered anybody else pulling anything like that inside of...
In an interview room?
Yeah.
I personally have not. I would never have thought that somebody would take a pen and try to use that as a weapon on themselves. I can tell you that I've never left a pen laying around before or since. And yeah, again, it was a learning experience. When people are desperate, they'll do whatever they can do.
I had a guy rip a Coke can in half and slice his throat in front of detectives. And so that was... We've had a couple of those.
Yeah, when people get desperate, they'll do anything.
Those will be for other episodes.
Another funny side note that most people probably don't know, and if you listen to the recording, because I know that's been released to the public, where we find Pam after she stabbed herself repeatedly, there's people who believe that I scream an expletive.
You said bad language.
I did use bad language, and I laugh every time I hear it. And they play it on TV, so I don't know if it's really me saying a bad word or if it's just people putting...
Brian, knowing you, it's you, first of all. Second of all, is all of us would say the same thing being policemen, okay, when that happens.
Yes, it was a 4-lettered word followed by me.
So ambulance people came, right? They treated her?
They did. They
Who put the rap on?
That's a good question. We did send patrol officers, obviously, with her because I had to do a press conference in about 30 minutes after she had almost bled out in my female bathroom. And so I was busy trying to get ready for the press conference. I would imagine that some kind of medical personnel who treated her put those bandages on. I still, to this day, am not sure what those bandages are. I have a suspicion of what they look like.
Oh, I know what they look. I've seen the picture of it look.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that's what they are, but they definitely look like what you and I were probably both thinking.
Yes. Okay. I take it. Okay. Yeah.
This is G-rated, right?
Bandages is a loose term. How's that sound?
Sure.
Okay. So anyways, and that's the infamous picture, booking picture of Pam Hupp with the white band around her neck. We'll say band, okay, for the sake of our discussions here. So there's a behind the scenes story about Pam Hupp with the murder of Louis Gumpenberger. She pled guilty, and it was an Alfred plea. Before we close on, what is an Alfred plea? What did she, when she pled guilty to the case? And she pled guilty to what was her sentence?
Yeah, so the prosecutor, Tim Lomar, at the time was seeking the death penalty. The negotiations began taking place, and the family of Louis really wanted the case to kind of resolve because they wanted to move on. You know, they'd been living it for 3 years, and they agreed that if Pam would plead guilty, they would drop the death penalty, which is what happened. Part of that discussion was that Pam entered into the Alfred plea that you discussed in Missouri. What that means is that she agreed with the court that the state had enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed the crime. However, she would not accept any culpability or responsibility for what happened. And what is interesting, because I was there when she pled guilty, her and the judge kind of went back and forth where she kind of was starting to balk on actually pleading guilty, and the judge kind of became upset with her and said, you know, we're not going to play games. You're either going to plead guilty or you're not going to plead guilty. And I remember her kind of looking out into the crowd, kind of taking like she was almost swallowing her pride. And she said, okay, I'll plead guilty.
And here it is today. And as we talked previously, she's at trial or pending trial for murder of Betsy Freya. So as new information comes up, we may have future episodes. I know you have one more episode coming up about the death of Pam Hupp's mother, which originally ruled as an accident. Now it's been ruled as a suspicious death through the St. Louis County Medical Examiner's Office. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close down the podcast here. And please tune in next episode regarding true crime, law enforcement trends, and regional issues affecting our society. And my name is Gary Fortney, and this is The Trend. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into this episode of The Trend. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to us at The Trend's website at www.trendmediallc.com, or you can email us at any time at thetrend@trendmediallc.com. We welcome everybody's comments, suggestions, or reviews. Don't forget to stay connected with us on social media. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Trend Media Podcast. and join the conversation on Facebook by searching The Trend Podcast. Check out our Amazon page through the link on our website, where you'll find some of our recommended products. We'll be back next time with more true crime stories, insights on law enforcement trends, and current trends with our region and the people we serve. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay part of the trend.